Win big with new DRF All Access Past Performances. With one best-in-class product, you now get all 3 past performance formats. Go to DRF.com and use coupon code 1FREEPP for a free single card today.
Hi, everyone. This is the preview segment of Derby Watch. There's a handful of Derby preps this weekend, including the Sunland Derby, the Hyacinth Stakes in Tokyo, one other day on allowance at Fairgrounds. But the strongest Derby prep of the year that David Aragona and myself, Brad Free, will be talking about will be run Saturday at Fairgrounds. David, the Risen Star Stakes came up very, very strong. Would you agree?
Yeah, it seems like all the connections of top Derby horses just love this Fairgrounds Road to the Derby this year. Maybe it's the distances of the races being slightly longer than their counterparts at this time of year. The 3-year-olds get to go a mile and an eighth this Saturday in the middle of February. But as you can see from this field, a lot of top contenders running in this race.
Yeah, in fact, 5 of the 12 entrants are actually listed on Derby Watch. You know, I wonder if one of the reasons why a lot of horsemen are looking toward Fairgrounds for their Derby points is that Baffert trainees are not eligible to run at Fairgrounds. It's owned by Churchill Downs, and Baffert trainees are not allowed to run currently at Churchill Downs owned property. So it certainly makes races a little bit softer. I don't think there's anything soft about the Risen Star Stakes. And in fact, the new Derby Watch favorite, Sierra Leone, David, he's going to be making his first start of the season in this race. And we're going to take a look at the Remsen Stakes, in which he finished second. I want you to talk us through the stretch run. That's Dornoch on the inside, Sierra Leone on the far outside. Tell us what you saw here.
A lot of things going on in this Remsen. I mean, first we could just focus on the top 2 finishers, and Sierra Leone makes this big sweeping run around the far turn, looks at the 8th pole like he's going to go on to an easy victory, but you could see here Dornoch battles back along the inside, and Sierra Leone, he's running through the wire. He doesn't prick his ears or anything like that to suggest he's pulling himself up. Dornoch just finds more down towards the inside. Now, one of the reasons why Dornoch might have found more is that the rail really was a significant advantage at Aqueduct on the day they ran the Remsen. Horses that had speed and were towards the inside really seemed to do their best running down there. The Remsen, though, also did feature a pretty fast pace, especially for the 2-year-olds going that 9 furlong distance, and Sierra Leone was the primary beneficiary of that pace. So what matters more, the fact that he got the right kind of pace setup or the fact that he was against the bias? I think that's a question you have to answer. Another question is he's putting blinkers on for Saturday's race, which is a bit of an X factor with regard to how he might run his 3-year-old debut.
Yeah, a little unusual to make an equipment change first time out of the box as a 3-year-old. I'm not going to second guess Chad Brown. And with regards to the Remsen Stakes, I know it's a little early, but early indications are that this year's Remsen came up as a relatively strong race. The 4th place finisher, drum roll please, came back to win the Jerome. The 7th place finisher, Domestic Product, came back to finish second in the Holy Bull. And the 9th place finisher, Ladom Bro, came back to finish second in the Swale. So maybe this year's Remsen was a loaded field. Is there any credibility to that line of thinking?
I know the Remsen is a race that generally over the years is not known as a producer of Kentucky Derby contenders, but there have been exceptions to that rule. Honor Code Cairo Prince, Zandon Mo Donegal, and last year's Remsen feels like one of those years where we got some pretty talented 2-year-olds competing in the race, and I think early indications are that's a speed figure that looks legitimate, and horses that were both towards the pace and also getting wide trips are the ones that ran back and did well, and Dornoch and Sierra Leone are both those types.
Well, Sierra Leone makes his first start of the year in the Risen Star Stakes this weekend. He'll be one of the contenders, but there's several other contenders in the race, including Catching Freedom, whose win last time out in the Smarty Jones. I really am not sure what to make of this race. He was decisive in victory. A couple of horses he beat came back to run well. I'm not sure if he wants more distance. He finished fairly well. What did you see here, David, in the Smarty Jones?
I mean, pedigree says he's supposed to be fine going longer. He's actually a half-brother to Bishop's Bay, who we were talking about at this time last year before he sort of went to the sidelines in the middle of the year. What I don't love about Catching Freedom is that he just seems still a little green and unprofessional in his races. He was pretty awkward in upper stretch with his lead changes of the Smarty Jones, kind of switching over to his left lead and then back to his right lead. But the good thing to note about the Smarty Jones is that it has so far proven to be a live race. Runner-up Just Steel came back and was second in the Southwest. The Southwest winner also came out of the Smarty Jones. He was fifth there, but came back and won the Southwest, that being Mystic Dan, improving his speed figure substantially. So there are some early indications that maybe that Smarty Jones is a slightly better race than the speed figures would indicate, but still, Catching Freedom's going to have to work out a trip in this race, and he is not exactly the most eye-catching horse in the mornings, and I know he's been outworked by some other Brad Cox horses coming in here.
In fact, one of those was Timberlake, who outworked Catching Freedom on February 10th, and that workout is available online. You can look it up. Doesn't mean he's going to run well in the afternoon. Timberlake doesn't mean the Catching Freedom is going to run poorly. It just shows you that Timberlake outworked Catching Freedom one morning in the Midwest. Okay, so a couple of horses coming out of potentially live races. Sierra Leone, the Derby Watch favorite, making his first start of the season, and Catching Freedom trying to reproduce his Smarty Jones victory this weekend in the Risen Star, along with several other contenders. A really good race. And David, you're going to take an in-depth look at the Risen Star on Thursday, correct?
Yeah, actually, I think the video might be out a little bit later today. Recorded it just before we did this, and many ways to go from a handicapping standpoint. I think both Steve Asmussen trainees are very dangerous. Hall of Fame coming off that fast speed figure. Track Phantom, who's just been reliable in the preps, and he's got a recency edge on a lot of these horses. And even Honor Marie, who made that big rush from last to first to win the Kentucky Jockey Club, going out for some lower profile connections. I think he's a very intriguing contender, launching his 3-year-old campaign in this race. So many ways to go in this Risen Star.
The Risen Star is race number 14 on Saturday at Fairgrounds. A lot earlier in the day is a one other than allowance. It's race number 3 at Fairgrounds, a mile and 1/16th. And one of the early contenders, or a horse that was really talked up quite a bit after his impressive maiden win, is Nash. His second career start, he won by more than 10 lengths at Churchill Downs with a 97 Beyer speed figure. He he did. He disappointed in his next 2 starts, finishing third behind Track Phantom, third and second. David, what about Nash, who's dropping in class, adding Lasix? He'll be forwardly placed. What do you think about Nash? Is it too late to cross a line through him as far as him being a Derby contender?
I think Nash has ability. I'm just a little concerned about him being a horse that wants the Derby distance. I know he broke his maiden going a mile and a 16th in very impressive fashion at Churchill Downs, but he was able to control the pace up front that day and really had everything go his way. So we know we can get that far with a perfect trip, but he had to chase Track Phantom in a couple of starts and just didn't seem to have the finish to really get to that foe in either the Gun Runner or the Lecomte. So I'm a little concerned that he might be a horse that would eventually appreciate a turn back, maybe more of a 7 furlong to a mile type, and there's some pedigree to indicate that might be the case. So I'll be interested to see how he does on Saturday.
Yeah, his dam, Sarah Louise, was kind of a 7/8 miler type, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
Yes, she, I think, beat Rachel Alexandra once upon a time as a 2-year-old, and also later in her career really did excel as a one-turn horse. So we'll see if that's true of him. And I think there are also distance questions that the other primary contender in this race, Tuscan Sky, has to answer.
Yeah, Tuscan Sky stretching out off of a decisive win on a wet track at Aqueduct. I have to believe that if the winner of this allowance race wins impressively, they'll be running into graded stakes next time out to try to get their way into the Kentucky Derby. But both Nash and Tuscan Sky have questions to answer. It's race number 3 at Fairgrounds on Saturday. On Sunday in New Mexico is the Sunland Derby, and the Sunland Derby actually awards 20 points to the winner, 20 Derby points to the winner. And let's take a look at the field for the Sunland Derby. There you go. 5-2 favorite on the morning line is Stronghold, making his first start since the Los Alamitos Futurity. He finished second in that race. David, I don't think that you are real high on the Los Al Futurity, and I kind of agree with your sentiments. Talk a little bit about Stronghold.
Yeah, remains to be seen how good of a race that was. The winner obviously came back and was very disappointing in the Southwest, though he seemed like a horse that really wasn't handling the wet track that day, so maybe you don't want to make too much of that. But still, it's not like the Los Alamitos Futurity came back a particularly fast race, and we'll see. I thought Stronghold got a pretty good trip that day. He was pulling a little bit in the early stages, but got through on the inside and just ultimately couldn't quite get to the Bob Baffert trained winner, settling for second that day. Not as big of a test here in the Sunland Park Derby Derby. I think they're taking the easier path as opposed to trying that stakes Robert B. Lewis earlier this month in California, where he would have run into NISO. So this is the much easier spot for Stronghold, and we'll see if we learn a lot more about him in this race. I would say he's probably facing one other potentially legitimate Derby contender in Informed Patriot, who is also coming out of the Smarty Jones that we talked about a little bit earlier. So they feel like the two main protagonists in here.
Yeah, the winner of the Sunland Derby gets 20 points and will move right up the list of on the Derby Watch, or the Derby point standings, I should say. As far as the recent history of the Sunland Derby, in 2022, the race was won by Slow Down Andy. He did not make the Kentucky Derby, but he won the Grade 2 Del Mar Derby and also a Grade 1 against Older late last year. In 2015, Firing Line won the Sunland Derby. He would finish second to American Pharoah that year in the Kentucky Derby. So there is some precedent regarding the Sunland Derby producing potential starters, but we'll find out more on Sunday afternoon, see if Stronghold can make his presence as the only California-based horse on the Derby Watch list, see if he can verify that standing. Okay, it's time for our On the Bubble segment. We're going to talk about three horses that we've discussed and are currently on the bubble, not on the Derby Watch list. One of them is Nash. He's a contender in the One Other Than at Fairgrounds. We talked about him. Agate Road, runner-up last weekend in the Sam Davis. And I want to just briefly mention Antiquarian, who runs on Saturday at Fairgrounds in a maiden race. It's race number 9. Not that we think he's a Derby candidate, but we do think that the horse who beat him last time out, Conquest Warrior, is in fact a Derby candidate. Let's take a look at the past performances for Nash, Agate Road, Antiquarian, and Conquest Road. Nash, you're going to see him in the past performances for the allowance race this weekend, Agate Road, Antiquarian. And there's Conquest Warrior, who is on the Derby Watch list. He overcame a lot of trouble in that maiden win. He will be running later this month in an allowance race at Gulfstream Park, according to his trainer, Shug McGahee. If that race doesn't fill, McGahee is also looking at the Fountain of Youth in early March. David, what about Conquest Warrior, a horse that we haven't really talked about too much, and all he has so far is just a maiden win?
Yeah, Conquest Warrior was a horse that I think people are excited about, and probably for good reason. He's just done a lot in both career starts, albeit against Maiden Company, but on debut, he overcame some trouble and greenness. That was Cigar Mile Day, won by El Capi, a horse who has since gone to the sidelines, but that seemed like a maiden race that we were going to see a lot of nice horses come out of, and some horses have run well out of that race, including Conquest Warrior, who I know there was only a half length separating he and Antiquarian at the wire of that Gulfstream Park 1 mile maiden event, but the difference in their trips was much more than half a length. I mean, Conquest Warrior was in trouble at multiple points, had trouble at the start, got stopped in traffic on the far turn, and still was able to regain his momentum to run down that first-time starter at the end. So even though the buyer came back light in 84, I think people are expecting better from Conquest Warrior down the line, and seems like a kind of horse who's not going to have trouble negotiating some added distance. But it still is interesting to see how Antiquarian is going to run against the tougher field, because the maiden race that he's participating in on Saturday has plenty of other intriguing runners, including the second place finishers to a couple of horses that are running in the Risen Star later in the day, those being Hall of Fame and B Dancer, who are both coming out of maiden events.
Yeah, even the horse on the outside, Cornish Man, is held in very high regard by his connection. So this maiden race, race number 9 on Saturday at Fairgrounds, who knows? It could produce something. It's going to at least produce a clue to the form of Conquest Warrior. Antiquarian, if he wins, it's going to flatter the form of Conquest Warrior. Okay, that's a wrap for the Derby Watch preview. The Risen Star Stakes is the top 3-year-old race of the weekend and arguably of the season. David and I will recap the Risen Star when we meet again next week. So for David Aragona, I'm Brad Free. We'll see you next week.